All right, how do we develop throwing? Anyone? Anyone? Josh, what do you reckon? How would you develop your throwing? Throwing is obviously, we've talked about strength, we've talked about flexibility, we've talked about speed. Now we're talking about throwing. It's a critical part of any position that you play. Whether you're a pitcher or a position player, it doesn't make any difference. It's a critical part of the game. It's a very complex movement. How are we going to develop it?
Jaeger, zero out, long toss.
Okay, long toss. Yeah, that's one way to do it. Throw often. That's usually the best place to start. Throw more. All right. Again, when we talk about the idea of progressive overload, if we just go from not throwing at all to throwing every day 100 balls a day at absolute maximum velocity, how do you think that's going to affect our arm? What do you think? It's probably not going to be too good, is it? Progressive overload. Okay, so over time, you need to progressively increase the number of days per week that you throw. Over time, you need to progressively increase the number of throws that you make per session. And over time, you gradually need to increase the distance and or the velocity of throws. So there's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily agree with long toss, but they still accept that you have to throw at a higher intensity to develop your arm strength. All right, so even if you're not necessarily releasing it up here and throwing a long distance, even if you're throwing flat, you still have to throw harder to help develop your throwing velocity. All right, so again, just to throw often, that's good. Playing catch, even light catch, doing that often is really going to help your development, because what you're doing is increasing the efficiency of the movement. As I said, it's a very complex movement. It's one of the most complex movements in all of sport. Again, taking that energy from here, transferring that through your trunk, through your shoulders, into a horizontal power, in whatever direction it is. That transfer of that force, it's very complex. So you have to practice the movement a lot, and you have to practice the movement at a low intensity to develop that efficiency. Yep, fast cars.
We talk about, especially if we've been shut down or something for a while.
Yep.
And then coming back into throwing 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week.
Yep.
Is there anything wrong with throwing 6 days a week, 7 days a week?
Well, that would probably depend.
Recovery.
Yeah, that would depend on the individual. If it was done very lightly, like if, for instance, you just threw very light at a short distance every day, and then every couple of days started to stretch it out a little bit, but then on the days in between still threw light.
Throwing, do your normal, throw hard twice a week,
Yep.
apart from games.
Yep. I've got a couple of little resources here which I'll just show you really quickly before we...
Listening to your voice, of course.
Yeah, that's right. Listen to your arm. I'll see if I can fish out the right one. Here's one of them. Okay, so here's an example of a throwing program. Now, you guys may have seen this before. So the level 1 or stage 1 is basically 20 throws at your very short basic distance, followed by 10 throws, 5 metres back further than that. All right, and then you have a rest day, day 2, and then the next day you can see you're increasing the number of throws and the number of throws at the further distance. So the total throws there on the right-hand side of the page is the total throws for the session, and obviously incrementally going up by 10 throws each time. Oh, hello. Bad driver. Where's my mouse gone? There it is. All right, so you see level 3, 20 throws at 45 feet or 15 metres, 20 throws at 20 metres, and 10 throws at 30 metres. So each time just progressing out a little bit further. This particular program is a program that I prescribe for people who are either coming back from after a break, or particularly if they're coming back after an injury. If you follow this program to a T, it should take you 2 weeks. So level 1, you throw level 1 one day, you have a day's rest. The next time you throw level 2, if you complete level 2 throwing and you continue to come up pain-free, then you progress to level 4. All right, but you notice how it's very progressive. If you just go out there and throw every day, you might feel good some days, other days you might not. This is a very, very structured program. You guys will notice who are doing the Jaeger throwing program, it's a little less structured, isn't it? It just suggests that you basically throw every day and you read your arm. If your arm feels good, you continue to go back. If it doesn't feel that great, then you keep it fairly short for that day. The Jaeger program is generally more of an advanced program that you would be a good couple of weeks at least into your throwing program before you would start the Jaeger program. This is basically that introductory phase. It's either after your off season or after a break or after an injury of some sort. Haven't had any throwing at all for a period of, probably 2 weeks to a month. You would want to do something like this before you came back. All right, I've got another one in here that's, where is it? It's fairly similar. Just see if I can. Okay, so you notice that that one was based on, oh, hang on, wrong one. Sorry, there it is. Notice this one is just based on time. So for you guys in the QBA, have you noticed that some days we'll do a timed throwing program and some days we do a number of throws throwing program? Again, this is just 2 examples of that sort of stuff. All right, so we said we need to throw often, we need to progressively overload the number of days per week, the number of throws per session, and the number of distance, or the distance or velocity of those throws. Your rest and recovery is going to be important, both after individual throwing sessions. So if you have a heavy throwing session, you're probably going to be a little bit stiff and a little bit sore. So you'll need to make sure you get adequate rest after that throwing session before you go out there and throw again. Remember that compensation model that I put on the board before? That's the same for your throwing. If your level is, say, here, and then you throw heavy, it breaks the muscles in your arm down a little bit and you're fatigued. It maybe hurts a little bit, but when you rest and recover, your body gradually adapts. Eventually you get to the point where you overcompensate just a little bit above the level of stress that you previously had. And then at that point, if you throw again, you'll continue to develop. But if you come back too soon before your body has completely recovered from that session, you'll probably start that downward spiral towards having a sore arm. But certainly after seasons. So we've talked a little bit more recently about how much time off people should have after a season. What do you guys know about that?
2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 months. If you have a busy summer with lots and lots of baseball and all that sort of stuff. There was a big piece of research that came out of the US a couple of years ago that suggested that if possible you want to try and get as much as 2 to 3 months of downtime. So downtime doesn't necessarily mean absolutely no throwing, but it certainly means a lighter period of throwing during that time throughout the course of the year. It's difficult in Australia because we don't necessarily play the concentrated number of games that, for instance, they do in the US. And as a result, we've kind of got tournaments spread all throughout the year, and it's very difficult to actually get that downtime, to get absolute rest for a period of 2 to 3 months. But you need to try and find, at least, even if you're not absolutely completely stopping throwing, you need to find times to get rest. You need time to give your body, your arm, time to recover from the vigours of a busy and stressful throwing summer. All right, so that's important as well. Okay, so prior to a pre-season training, there should be at least 2 weeks of throwing. So that throwing program that I just put up on the board before, that's generally the sort of thing that I would recommend people actually complete before their team starts their first on-field training session. All right, so those guys who registered in the QBA program early enough this year, I actually sent out a couple of weeks before the start of the program, I sent out that same throwing program with the hope that most of you, if you weren't already throwing prior to that, would actually start a basic throwing program so that when you got to the first throwing session on whatever day it was that we started the QBA, that you would actually already have some preparation prior to that, rather than having to come out and do your training drills and throw out your arm on the first day because you've done absolutely no throwing. Athletes should throw flat ground work, so start to progress to some pitching practice prior to throwing off the mound. So you should actually, at a low intensity over a short distance, start practicing all of your pitches and that sort of stuff before you actually get to the bullpen. And prior to actually pitching in a game situation, you should complete at least 2 to 3 bullpens of 20 to 30 pitches prior to throwing in a game. All right, so again, this is part of our coaches' education material, all that stuff. We're trying to educate people on how to manage pitches and manage the workload in their arms. But to be honest, even if you've got a coach who doesn't have a great deal of education and all that sort of stuff, it's your arm, right? If you understand this information, you need to say to the coach, I haven't done much preparation. If you do get put into pitch, you need to stipulate, look, I've only got this amount of pitches because I haven't done much in the way of preparation. So if you've had a couple of bullpens, you want to make sure you look after your arm. And if it comes to the first game of the season and you haven't done much in the way of pre-season pitching preparation, and you go out and throw 80 pitches on the first game, it might be within your pitching limitations allowed by that particular league, but is it looking after your arm appropriately? Probably not. All right, so you need to gradually, remember we talked about progressive overload, you need to progressively increase the amount. So in terms of increasing your pitch count by no more than 10 to 15 pitches per week. So if prior to the start of your first team training, you do 2 weeks worth of just playing catch, stretching out for that throwing program, and then you get to your first pre-season training, you start your training. Hopefully once you've started those trainings, you start some bullpens. You've got 2 to 3 bullpens in prior to the first game. If the first game, if all you've done is 2 to 3 bullpens of 30 pitches, what would be an appropriate pitch count that you would throw maybe in a game in that first week? If we're talking increase by no more than 10 to 15 pitches per week, that first week, what would be an appropriate pitch count? Yeah, 45. So if you're throwing bullpens of up to 30 pitches, up to 45 might be about as far as you go. All right, and then every week after that, you could throw an additional 10 to 15 pitches on top of that. That is progressively overloading the amount of stress on your arm. Does anyone have any questions about that in terms of their pitching preparation? Again, I will email all of you guys all of this stuff. But obviously if you have any questions, now's a good time to hit me with those. Soreness is a good indication obviously to back off. So again, the Jaeger throwing program, the resources we send out of that really talk about trying to read your body and read your arm. So the days that your arm's a bit stiff and sore, they're the days that you probably need to back off. If your arm feels really good, you can continue to go back and throw longer or continue to throw a bit more. But you've got to read your body. You've got to assess how you feel and take note of that, of that stuff.